Hi, it is September 12th, and we're looking at a season of politics, elections coming forth in our local towns in Connecticut, and I'm very happy to have with us today a special guest. We've had him on before, but now it really counts because we're in the middle of election season. It's going to be coming, November 7th, right?
7th.
Tuesday, November 7th, and this is Bernie Dennler. He is the candidate for First Selectman in Colchester. Hi, Bernie.
Hi, Sheila. Thank you so much for having me on today.
I'm so glad you've come back, and now you're in the middle of the campaign season. How is it going so far?
Well, I think it's been going very well. It's been, since January. That's when we announced this campaign, and that I said that I would get into the race for First Selectman of Colchester. And that's a little earlier than some people do in these municipal campaigns, but I wanted to be able to get out there and start talking to residents of town about the real issues in our community and what we could do to make a difference. And I wanted to hear their feedback as well. My day job, I work at the Lebanon Town Hall in our neighboring town, and I get to have that interaction with residents day to day, and to see what's really affecting them, what they are looking for from their town government. And I wanted to be able to have that same kind of perspective running as a first selectman candidate. So it was important to me to get out early and start talking to folks.
So it's not just interacting with the public in your work in Lebanon. You know what town government is like. You know the functions of it, what it needs, the organization of it, the protocols, the rules, right? That's something that will help you running Colchester, right?
Absolutely. I always talk about local government as being a sort of complicated machine almost, and that having spent the last several years working in another municipality, I've learned how to drive that machine.
Right.
And what's good about that is that when residents come in, they might know where they want to go, what the destination of this vehicle needs to be, but they don't always know how to drive it. They don't know what levers need to be pulled. So when a resident comes into the selectman's office that I work in, I'm able to help point them in the right direction or help them navigate this sometimes cumbersome thing that can be local government to make it work for them.
So you're going to have a head start when you get into that first selectman's seat in Colchester, right?
Right.
Because you know how government works. And we're going to talk about your history because a lot of people come to town and they want to get involved. You've been around. I see this is a fourth generation Colchester family that you're in, right?
Yes,
so
that's
give
correct.
us a little history of that.
A little history of the family?
Yeah.
Okay. So my great-grandparents, Harold and Dorothy Brown, they were our first generation of Colchester residents. Harold Brown, some people would know him as Heck Brown, was a fire chief in Colchester, and Dorothy Brown, Dot Brown, Mrs. Brown, was a teacher in Colchester. So both very involved.
Did she teach French?
No, she taught first grade.
First grade, okay. There was another Brown. Okay.
So different Browns, but both very involved in the Colchester community in their own ways. My great-grandfather also served as a state senator for a period of time, representing the town of Colchester. And my grandmother, Janice Brown Adams, she was also a teacher. She taught mainly in the town of Lebanon, but she was very involved in the Colchester community. She was one of the women who helped start the Colchester Bible Baptist Church, and she also was very involved in the Historic District Commission, in particular the preservation efforts and promotion around the history of the Colchester School for Colored Children, and helping to make that piece of Colchester's history known.
You have a lot to live up to, and so you're also living in a home that you hope to restore. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my great-grandparents were the first generation of my family to live in Colchester, and when they moved to town, they bought a home on the historic Colchester Green, and that became my grandmother's home when my great-grandfather passed away. She lived there with my great-grandmother, and she passed away, sadly, in 2021. The house had been in the family for a few generations at that point. It's part of our family history, but there wasn't anybody else in the family who was ready to take on some of the needs of the house. My husband and I, who lives in Colchester with me, we were already looking to buy a property at the time, and it was the timing that just sort of aligned. And it was really him who said, I think we could take this on. Let's do this, and it will take time, it will take work, but we could help maintain the family legacy and make our own little contribution to preserving a
So
piece of
that's
Colchester
great. Are there
history.
still other family members around Colchester now?
Yes, we do have a couple. Cousins and my mother who still lives in town.
Great. And what has been your trajectory? Did you live here through your whole growing up, or how did that work?
I did. So I grew up in Colchester. I went to Bacon Academy, graduated from there. I spent a couple years away at college. I went to school in New York at a university, Hofstra University on Long Island, where I studied journalism and political science. And that was sort of a different whirlwind experience. I got to see a different side of life and a little bit of a different side of the country. Growing up in a rural, suburbanish community like this, it was different to see a much more urban environment. And also I was working as a reporter at the time. I was doing journalistic work. There was a presidential campaign going on at the time, and so some of my journalistic work took me around the country to different places, covering the New Hampshire primaries, covering the Donald Trump campaign for president in 2016, and eventually the 2016 Republican National Convention, where I was a credentialed reporter with media access on the floor, getting to talk to delegates, people like Rudy Giuliani, who I interviewed about the Trump campaign. And so to get to see...
Did he tell you the truth? Probably not.
Well, I'll say it was an interesting conversation. But I got to see a different side of politics as well. I think it's shaped the way that I viewed the political dynamics even that we have, in our small town.
How did it shape that? Because I assume you're a Democrat,
yes,
right? You're running on the Democratic ticket. So how did doing that journalistic work and that other work on campaigns shape your view?
So one of the things that I saw was how the media was operating in the 2016 landscape. And the way social media had become so prevalent and was starting to supplant a lot of local media and even national media at the time, and that there was a sort of feedback loop that seemed to be emerging where it was largely social media that was starting to drive some of even the national media narratives and the media cycle. At the local level, since I've returned to Colchester and worked in local government, where in the town I work for, there really is very, very little local media, if any, to speak of. There's a regional paper that somewhat covers that town, but it's even less local media than we have in Colchester.
Right.
And so what emerges in the absence of that is strictly the social media landscape. And that can be good. Individuals have a powerful soapbox. You as an individual have the ability to reach all of your neighbors and say exactly what's on your mind. But there is nobody who is the arbiter of truths in that environment.
There are no standards of
There's
journalism.
Exactly. And when you start to lose that, it becomes very easy for us to get absorbed in narratives, and we start to lose sight of policy.
And the fact that most people get not just their local news, but all of their news from Facebook and other social media, which is really horrendous because, as we were saying, there are no journalistic standards anymore. Anybody can start a paper. Well, you have a show, too,
I do.
on the local media.
One of the things that I did after the 2021 campaign in Colchester, where I was very disappointed in some of the lack of coverage and the lack of somebody who I thought could really dive into and explain and talk about some of the issues that were going on in town. I thought some of the reporting that did exist was sort of very surface level. And it's hard. I don't blame regional reporters when you travel from town to town to town and all you see is the 90 minutes that you see at a board meeting. There's a lot of the story that you miss. And I had an opportunity, because I was so embedded in it, that I knew pieces of the story. And so, having had the journalistic background, I got together with my friend Dave Koji, who was a business owner in town, who had already tried to do something along these lines of a local streaming Facebook thing, and said, let's create this show. Let's talk about local politics, but other local issues. We can promote businesses, promote community organizations, promote events, and we can do it from a local perspective as residents of the town.
Because that's supplanting what used to be the local newspapers that are dying in this country. So when people in our town have a very jaded, unrealistic view of what's happening, you have to come along and set them straight in your campaign and in all of your media appearances, right? I mean, it's not easy. It's harder. than it used to be.
I think the good news is that right now, I think Colchester residents are paying pretty close attention, closer attention than I think you usually see at the local level. I know that because when I go out door knocking and I talk to residents in their homes at the doors, I ask them, are you following along? And usually when you work on a local campaign like this, especially as early as I had started, talking to folks, the answer for most people is no, because local government mostly takes care of itself. And it doesn't become this sensational thing that people have eyes on. This year they do.
So you think that more than usual. So, let's face it, on the odd years when we have these local elections, how many people vote? 20%, maybe? Maybe 30 if you're lucky?
Turnout is low. It takes probably less than 3,000 votes for somebody to become first selectman of Colchester.
Right. Out of how many total voters in Colchester?
Oh, you got 15,000 residents, so less voters than that.
Yeah.
But
so it's important that you try to get the word out, which always amazes me because the life that you live day to day, those decisions, many of them, the streets, the phones, the roads, the schools, they're all based locally, right?
Right.
And you have a say in them if you get involved or if you just vote. And yet everybody gets ready for the big presidential elections, and we don't pay as much attention. Do you have an answer for that, why that is?
Well, again, I think it gets back to the idea that largely local government sometimes takes care of itself, that you have local representatives who are heavily invested in doing the work of their town, and I think people only become this engaged when things start to go wrong.
Okay.
And that's the cycle, though, I think, in these local elections.
Right. And that's a good place to start, because in all of your literature, I'm holding up one of Bernie's, we'll see more of it later, one of his walk-around flyers when you go door to door. Colchester is divided. We are moving backwards. So you think that there is a lot more interest, excitement, anger about what's happening in town. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think we are divided. But I think that the division is being stoked sometimes at the top. We've seen this in national politics as well, where elected officials will pit people against each other. And all the dynamics that we see on social media, I can't tell you how often when I talk to people at doors that they're talking about the anger that they see on social media from residents pointed at each other, are based around politics and how the national politics has sort of infected the local level. And people want to get back to a place where we can put some of that aside and treat each other as neighbors again. We had a history in this town, as in many small towns, where Democrats and Republicans sat down at the boards. And yeah, there are some philosophical differences that are baked in that are going to come through. But people also were able to leave their party hats at the door to an extent and ask, what do we need to do that's in the best interest of Colchester? And the fact is, I know from working in local government, most of the issues you're dealing with day to day just have no analog at the national level. When we're talking about, what we're going to do about a grant for, say, Norton Park, which is an issue in our town. That's not an issue that has any corollary at the national level. That is a strictly Colchester issue, and we need to decide how we as Colchester citizens want to prioritize and balance what we can afford to do at one time in the town. And that's not a Democratic or Republican thing.
And should go pretty smoothly, and there should be some cooperation, because partisanship shouldn't play as much of a role on these local levels, right?
That's what I believe. Yeah. And I believe that in part because of that professional side that I was talking about. Having served in government for another town, the first boss I worked for was a Republican first selectman of the town of Lebanon. Currently, I serve under a Democratic first selectman for that town. Right. I got to tell you, the party hats that they wore made very little difference. They've got different leadership styles, but not because one's a Democrat and one's a Republican. They worked for different configurations of those boards of selectmen and board of finance. People have come and gone. Party affiliations have changed in some cases. But my role has stayed the same, which is to do the work of that community.
Because the terms are only 2 years. I mean, other offices in the town have 4-year terms.
Yes.
But the selectman has 2-year terms. And of course, that almost means, like in Congress, you start campaigning for re-election by the time you get in. Do you think that should change? Do you think there should be a more professional I know you believe more in the
Yeah,
professionalism
so
of the office.
there's two things that you could consider on that front, and it wouldn't be up to just me as first selectman, but I'll share my own personal thoughts on it. In the town of Lebanon, they adopted a town charter, and they changed their board of selectmen and first selectmen to staggered 4-year terms. And the idea of that was to maintain a little bit of institutional knowledge, and I also think it has the effect of cutting down on that intense political cycle where somebody gets elected, they're just getting their feet wet, and then suddenly they're launching into campaign season.
Right.
I do believe that is a very short time frame, in that while sometimes you might think that that's a good thing, because if somebody gets in who you don't like, you got a chance right away. 2 years later, you can make a change. But I think it does fuel a really, really political, partisan cycle in town. That's why some towns move to a town manager system. They say, take the daily management out of the politics altogether.
Right.
Would Colchester go for a town manager position? I'm not sure. I've heard really different things and really strong perspectives on that from people at the doors. But that's why a decision on bringing something like that forward lies with a charter revision commission, not just one person in the first selectman's office.
It's something you would be interested in furthering exploring about, right?
Yeah, the first thing that I'd be interested in exploring, though, is revisiting making the positions of tax collector and town clerk appointed, hired positions rather than elected positions. That's what a lot of towns have done. Those are very, very complicated positions. I'll tell you, someone working in a town hall, there's a lot that happens in those offices. Right. The town clerk's office, you are touching so many different areas of your state and even sometimes federal government. Having somebody who is certified, who is qualified to do that work is really important. Same with tax collector.
Yeah, the history of town clerks, certainly in Colchester, has been you get someone who happens to be a Democrat who just becomes so much, almost like an institution, so well known, so well liked, so experienced, so well qualified to answer all the questions and do the job, and they almost become fixtures. And even though they have to get reelected, they almost become fixtures in town. So you want to even think of professionalizing that.
Yeah, and that has been the trend in small towns. Colchester tried it at a charter revision a couple years ago. It didn't work out, but people had some confusion about the way it was going to be handled. You know, there's different ways to handle how to hire the position. Some towns might choose to appoint for a set period of time, so you still may have that cycle of every 4 years potentially being replaced and being at the whims of politics. I don't believe, personally, that it should be that way. I think that we should hire it as a dedicated administrative professional the same way you would hire for the town planner or the director of public works. It's that important.
There's something to be said for politics. Different views can be challenged in the marketplace of ideas, in the voting booth, and maybe you have a better idea for what should happen to the town than someone else does. And so sometimes that's a good thing when you have that contest of views.
I think that contest of views, though, should be taking place on boards like the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, the Board of Education. I don't think that that should be happening in the town clerk's office or the tax office, because those are straightforward. They are governed by state statute and town ordinances, and it is black and white.
Okay, interesting. Okay, everybody listening to that, Bernie's views on that. Colchester is divided. We are moving backwards. And your goal is, let's bring Colchester together. That is the motto for your campaign.
That is the motto for the campaign.
Okay, so talk about that.
So
why are we going backwards?
Why are we going backwards? Because instead of focusing on the work of the town, we are getting into these petty partisan fights, dramatic theatrical meetings. We've had meetings that are making the news, police being called. Work is not getting done. Last week, there were important items on the agenda for the Board of Selectmen. Firefighters who showed up because their union contract was under consideration. Town staff that were there because of time-sensitive grant paperwork that needed to be dealt with for the Norton Park project. We're not talking about dealing with the issues with the town audit or what is the plan for the senior center, which is over budget. We know that's been an issue that has been discussed, but there's no plan that's been made public by the Board of Finance. But instead of dealing with those things, we went off on this tangent at the Board of Selectmen level where the town clerk was being accused of these terrible things, and the first selectman tried not to give her a chance to defend herself. And then the meeting was cut short. No citizens got to speak, and none of the items of actual town business came forward for discussion.
And
it all
that's
gets
not
cut
the
off.
first meeting that was a disaster.
That's not an aberration. That kind of thing where the circus sort of takes over is becoming the norm in Colchester, and that is moving us backwards.
So now you can't put yourself in the mind of someone else, but what do you think the purpose is of the current administration to do that, to behave that way?
It's politics. It's politics. You invite the news media in, you get cameras, you get headlines that damage your opponent. We know what the strategy is there. You can go on YouTube and look up my opponent by his name, and you can see him lay out his campaign strategy, which is strike hard, show no mercy, deal your opponent a death by 1,000 cuts.
This is like what I call the Trumpification of Colchester. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, it's the same, playbook that we've seen on the national level distilled to the local level. And I don't believe that people want to see that. That's the bet in this campaign.
Okay, so how are you going to change that? How are you going to bring us together?
So it gets back to bringing us to that professional mindset. I don't look at things strictly through the electoral lens because my primary experience serving is as a non-elected public servant in that professional context. So the first way I view people is not as Democrats and Republicans. I think that mindset is a little bit different than what you have right now.
But we have to say you're running as a Democrat.
Yes, absolutely.
So I want you to let people know as a Democrat, what is your philosophy of government? So what makes you a Democrat, and how is that going to inform the work that you're going to do for the town?
Well, first let me talk about the idea of bringing people together, because that was the first piece of the question. That is the broad theme of the campaign. My personal leadership style is to act as a mediator. I like to lean on that journalistic background that I have to ask questions, to learn facts, and to get people talking with each other. I served on the Board of Finance. I was the vice chair of our board at a very divided time. We had 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. The only way anything got done was if we managed to compromise. And people had a tendency to go into their corners. I saw it as my job to help mediate that and to get the conversation moving again. And I think that we were successful on that. And that's what I want to do as first selectman. It is not just to be the person sitting at the top and calling the shots and making all the decisions at the board level. The Board of Selectmen is the chair of the Board of Selectmen. Sometimes the chair needs to take a little bit of a step back and see what are the factions here in the room with us, and how do we help them mediate? How do we help them compromise without going to a place where we are pitting them against each other? And I think that is the strategy right now from the other side, and I just take things from a very different approach. But you asked, what makes me a Democrat? Why I'm a Democrat? Well, there's a couple of things. Big believer in the importance of public education. Come from a family of teachers. My dad taught kids at risk of dropping out of high school his entire career. I know firsthand the difference that good education and good teachers make in kids' lives, and the importance of being able to retain those teachers. I benefited from going through the Colchester school system. I want to make sure that kids and families in Colchester get the same opportunities today that I had when I grew up in this town. I'm a believer in equality and standing up for people and valuing diversity in our communities nationwide and in Colchester. And I think that is something that Democrats need to stand up for and continue to stand up for. Last year, the first selectman tried to remove a book from library shelves because he said that it contained sexualized content. The book was a book for 7th graders called Who is RuPaul? RuPaul's a drag queen. I get it. But there was nothing in that book that was inappropriate for the age level that the book's own packaging stated it was for. It was part of a series of books about influential people.
Don't you think that was done as a kind of just that cultural game ploy that the Republicans are doing all over the country?
Yeah, some Republicans, yeah. Not all Republicans, though, because there were a lot of Republicans in Colchester who said that this is beyond the pale.
Well, and the MAGA Republicans, the ones that are like the first selectman now. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that standing up for freedom of speech and freedom of literature is an important thing for us as Democrats right now. It's, again, part of, I think, our identity, and that's the fight at this moment. I also believe that as Democrats, we need to stand up for working people and working families. And that means, contrary to what my Republican opponents might say about me, we need to have balance when it comes to our spending priorities in Colchester and in small towns, because property taxes hit everybody the same. You got one mill rate for the town, and we need to be conscious of that when we make decisions about what we are going to fund and when we are going to fund things. Look, I wish we had a magic bucket of money and we could fund every project that we could dream of all at once. That's not going to happen.
Well, so now we get to your philosophy about Colchester. How do you envision Colchester moving forward? Are you going to work to improve the tax base so that you can afford more things in the budget and the schools? Or are you interested in maintaining the tradition of Colchester as a small town community and not make it too big? I mean, where do you stand on that? That's a big issue.
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, and that's right in line with Colchester's own motto, which is where tradition meets tomorrow. We're going to do a little bit of both of those things. I don't want to see an over-industrialization of Colchester. I've heard conversations about, do we open up zoning for new industrial areas outside of the downtown, outside of the existing industrial district? I'm very hesitant to do something like that, to have warehouses that envelop our downtown community. I don't want to see that kind of sprawl. At the same time, there are opportunities where we could make some strategic decisions about the existing industrial area, or even what was scheduled to be the future development district that really needs a second look, because it was named that over 10 years ago, and there's been no development in the future development district. So something needs to change there. And that's got to be one of our priorities as we start looking at the 2025 Plan of Conservation and Development and how that's going to come about. But when it comes to bringing in economic opportunities for the town, we've got an amazing downtown. I think we need to lean on its strengths. Same with Westchester, which I think often gets left out of the conversation. Sometimes we forget that Colchester is a town that really has two downtowns, two commercial business hubs for storefront-facing businesses. And there's more that we can do in Westchester to help develop the tax base and support the businesses that are currently there to make sure that we don't lose them. I want to make some strategic investments as well on the town side. I really believe that we have got to hire some sort of dedicated grant writing services at the town hall. My preference would be for a dedicated employee. It's not just up to me. We'll see what the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance think. If they would prefer to start with a dedicated grant writing services through a consulting firm or something like that, a shared service with another town, I'd be open to having all of those conversations. But I know from working in local government how much money is out there for towns like Colchester to make improvements to our downtown. We could do streetscapes projects. We could build a municipal parking lot as an annex to Town Hall with access to the green. The plans exist. They are engineered. They've been sitting on a shelf for over 10 years. We just need to find the funding to get it done. There are historic buildings in our community that are starting to become a little bit distressed, and they are in desperate need of some assistance. There's funding out there, Department of Economic and Community Development and some other sources at the state and federal level, but it's not like the American Rescue Plan funds that the town has used over the last couple of years. That's money that the federal government handed out to every town.
Right.
Not quite no questions asked, but they handed you the check first and the questions come later. We can't continue to rely on that. Those funds are drying up.
Right.
That was an anomaly. But we've seen how powerful those grants can be. But if we want to continue to benefit from programs like that, we have to actually ask. And asking involves time and paperwork and resources. And the fact is, most small towns do not have the resources on staff to chase those things. The ones that do, they get the funding.
Well, was grant writing something you learned in your current employment? Is involved with that?
Yeah, to an extent. But again, I work in a building that has a very small staff. Our resources are stretched in some cases. So we are very selective about what we chase, and it's very in line with what the priorities in that community are, which truly are very different than some of the priorities in Colchester. Work for a town that's very, very focused mainly on land preservation. Farmland preservation is sort of the biggest thing that the vision for the town is to ensure that it remains a farming community for generations to come. That's a piece of the puzzle in Colchester, but it's not the whole puzzle.
So let me ask you, when you get, well, let me go through what you say is your vision, and then we can talk about each one. You say bring stability, efficiency, civility, and real transparency back to our town hall. We talked a bit about the civility and the stability. How are you going to bring the transparency back? I know that's a big issue. How will you communicate with the voter, the resident, about what's going on?
I think there's a tie back to the stability thing of it. My opponent likes to talk about transparency, but you can't have transparency without accuracy. And you can't have accuracy when you don't have stability in your town hall, especially in areas like the finance department, which has seen a lot of instability over the last couple of years. And the result has been inaccurate numbers, and that's not transparent. Last year, you had the budget that failed, and after the first budget failed, we were looking at the budget that had just wrapped up. Some of us realized that the town was on track to have overspent its budget. Something in the realm of $300,000 was what we forecasted. Well, suddenly we all stopped getting reports about what the town's year-end spending was. And it was clear there was a strategy to try to withhold that information until after the new budget passed, because it wouldn't look favorable. So I think it's ironic that some of the same people who talk about transparency, when it came down to it, not only were they not monitoring their finances correctly, they didn't seem to realize that the money was going to be overspent until we pointed it out. And two, they didn't try to own up to it. Same time this year, again, budget season. There were so many issues in this year's budget process, but at the end of it all, with the first budget referendum, the numbers that were distributed to the public were wrong. The mill rate that was proposed was not accurately representative of the budget that they had created. The numbers in the spreadsheet that was put in the paper's legal notice did not add up. I mean, literally, the columns did not add up. So when you have that kind of lack of accuracy and precision, there is no transparency when it comes to the town's finances. So I think that, for me, it's really important to get those details right. And that's the first piece of transparency. When
that was a combination of the Selectman's office, but also the Board of Finance, right?
Yeah. And that's why it's not just about me this year. I'm running for first selectman, but I'm really hoping that people will elect a team that can help change the direction in this town. Board of Finance, you got two great candidates, Scott Chapman, who's a financial planner, and Karen Belding, who currently serves as the president of the Colchester Baseball Softball League. Two people who have great community perspective, who've been very involved as residents on the residential side of the budget process, and who I think are committed to ensuring that the mistakes that were made in this year's budget process don't repeat themselves next year.
Right. The next thing in your vision is you're going to prioritize the use of grants to expand outdoor recreation, maintain historic buildings, and preserve our farms and open space.
Absolutely. So we talked about those things already. As I said, there's a lot of funding out there. Those are, I think, they're the big goals. They're the dreams in town. We want to be able to make economic development investments in our community. We want to be able to have, more walkable and safe public areas. We want public recreation to be bigger, more accessible, to be able to maintain some of our facilities better. Not all of that is going to be possible through the regular budget process. When we get some of those big ideas, some of that funding, I think, needs to come from elsewhere, and that's why I think that...
And you know how to do that.
Yeah, but I alone don't know how to do that. What I know, though, is that I cannot be the sole person at Town Hall. I'm not going to be the finance director, town planner, and public works director all in one. I know what I don't know, and that's why I want to hire someone who is an expert in that, who's dedicated to that, whose job it is to chase those resources, to bring them in. And you know what? If we move forward with a plan like that and we find out that we don't get a return on our investment, it costs more to have a position like that than we get back, then fine, it didn't work. But I will bet you now that if we make that gamble, that it will pay off, because it is an investment in our town. And one grant, when you look at what's out there, could pay for that person's salary for many years.
Yeah, good point. And you say you want to partner with civic organizations and small businesses to strengthen Colchester. How are we going to do that?
So we have, very fortunately in Colchester, a great body of community organizations, groups like the Colchester Land Trust, Community Giving Garden, the Garden Club, the Colchester Business Association, and a thriving community, as related to that, of small businesses. I've had some conversations with some of them about, what are opportunities that we could collaborate on. We already have some of that goes on in town. We are partners, but strengthening those relationships and bringing different organizations to the table, sometimes seeing, how can the town be a facilitator to have organizations collaborate with each other. We can bring new opportunities and make things possible in town that the town government alone could not do. It gets back to that idea of the first selectman as a mediator or a facilitator. Town government shouldn't do it all, but we can help bring people together. And I hear from a lot of residents when I'm out door knocking, they want to know, what can they do for Colchester? And so if the town government can be a partner in that process to help identify needs, and then partner with civic organizations in town to make it possible, I think that's huge.
And then you say collaborate with local and regional organizations to strategically promote economic development. So what kind of economic development do you see feasible in Colchester? You say you don't want the huge, big warehouse spaces circling the town, but what do you think is feasible? What are you looking for?
Well, I wouldn't say that we don't have any warehouses. I mean, there may be locations, again, you talk about like the industrial area of town, where we could say, this might fit here in this area. I wouldn't want to see a situation where we just, haphazardly say, who needs zoning anymore? Let it sprawl out into the residential areas of town. I hear a lot of concern from residents about that kind of future for our community. I think that we need to continue to support what makes us unique, which I think is our small business community. I know some people think, let's bring in more fast food, or let's bring in, some of these chain restaurants. There may be opportunities for that, but I also want to make sure that we are not forgetting about the unique small businesses. Take the restaurant community in Colchester, for example. We have, over the last 20 years or so, really started to develop a thriving community of unique restaurants in Colchester. It's one of the things that when you talk to people out of town, that they start to see as one of the unique attributes of our community. So being able to support continued unique endeavors like that, those are kinds of things that I would really love to see us when there's opportunities to help, or when a business owner, a prospective business owner comes in, they're coming in with ideas like that. Right. I think that's important.
So in recent years, Colchester was growing. I mean, when I came here, there were about 3,000 people, and now we've got, 18,000. What is the projection? Is it going to continue to grow? Is it reaching a plateau? And what about our school-age kids? How are we going to service them as they come along?
Well, there does seem to be continuing growth. We've got new developments that are continuing to go in town. There's been talk about a new residential complex in the downtown that was at one point considered for a CTIP program, which is one of the tax exemption programs. In the end, it was never brought forward. But there seems to be continued interest from developers.
Affordable housing interest?
Yeah. And beyond that, there seems to be continued interest from developers in Colchester. So I think it appears that there's going to be continued population growth in that area. We also have an aging population. It's why getting the senior center done is so important. We have a huge senior population in Colchester.
Do you foresee that's going to work its way out? There'll be another referendum. We'll get the funding. It'll be all set, or what?
Well,
what do you think?
Well, I know what I would like to see happen, and I hope that all of this will be worked out before the November election. However, it's been nearly a year since the bids came in showing what the project's budget was likely going to end up, and it's been either chaos or crickets from the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. Well, not the whole Board of Selectmen, I shouldn't say that, but from the first Selectman. Supposedly, there might be a meeting about it this week. We'll see what they do. I'm hoping that they are going to move something forward to referendum so that we can finally vote on this and ensure that the project has the funds it needs to be completed.
Yeah.
If they don't, if they delay and continue to kick the can down the road, when I'm elected, I will move as quickly as we can to get something out to referendum so that we can get this done. Because frankly, the project is going to run out of money if we don't do something soon.
We've been waiting such a long time in Colchester.
Yeah, we've got to get it done.
Yeah.
We should not have waited this long to bring something forward to referendum.
Yeah.
The building is being built.
Right.
They need the money to finish the project.
All right. So now you win, of course, and you're sitting in your chair the first day. What's the first 2-3 things you're going to do once you get in to be our first selectman?
Well, for me, the first thing is to meet with some of the department heads and the rest of the staff as well. I love the team that I work for and work with right now in the town that I serve, and building that team and seeing what that team is going to look like is the biggest priority for me in the beginning. Externally, some things that I don't know if it's day one, but they are
priorities.
They are priorities.
Priorities.
I want to get together a group, some representatives, Board of Ed, Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, Superintendent, Finance office staff, and figure out what we are going to do to bring some stability back to our finance department. The kind of chaos we've seen over the last 2 years, I will not put up with that. There will need to be some changes in the way we handle things. We've got vendors that aren't getting paid. We've got employees who are having issues being paid. I mean, the issues that have cropped up over the last couple years since we lost the position of CFO are not sustainable. They bring liability to our town. We've seen our bond rating threatened. I'm hoping that that situation is going to be resolved, but I want to make sure that once it's resolved, that it doesn't recur.
Right. Let's make sure that people understand what your job is. You are first selectman, and you are an elected and a paid position in town, an employee of the town. And then you work with a board. Tell us what your responsibilities are as first selectman vis-a-vis the Board of Selectmen that work with you.
Right. So the first selectman is responsible for managing the day-to-day operations of Town Hall, managing personnel, managing finances in coordination with the finance department and the Board of Finance. But the first selectman is the eyes on the ground in the building amongst elected officials who have a sort of legislative capacity. They are the chief executive for the town. They are the chief of police for the town, which has caused a little bit of a stir because of some things that have gone on under the current administration. Vis-a-vis to the Board of Selectmen, as you asked, the first selectman in executing on the day-to-day operations brings forward materials that require action by the Board of Selectmen. First selectman can't just willy-nilly sign contracts on behalf of the town, obligate the town to recurring funds through contractual services or whatever. You got to bring that to the Board of Selectmen for approval. So when you have departments that have contractual needs or ideas that they want to pursue, a lot of that needs approval from the Board of Selectmen, which is your philosophical board
and
governing the
ordinances,
town. Creating
laws are done how? Through you propose and
potentially could come directly from the first selectman or and then to the Board of Selectmen, then pass through to town meeting, which is truly the chief legislative body of the town. So it's town meeting that's getting the final say on matters like that.
And how many on the Board of Selectmen totally?
So Board of Selectmen is 5 members, 4 regular members of the Board of Selectmen, and then the first selectman.
And is there a requirement that there be at least 2 members from one political party so that it's not all Democratic or all Republican?
So the requirement is really a maximum on one party's representation. So you can't have more than 3 Democrats or 3 Republicans. As for what the other 2 positions, the minority representation positions, they don't have to be from a certain party. It could be you could have 3 Republicans and 2 unaffiliated, or you could have 3 Republicans and a Democrat and a Working Families Party member.
So you're hoping that when you're elected first selectman, that you will have 2 Democrats working with you,
Yes.
and you will have a majority on the board in that sense, right?
Yes, that's my hope.
Okay.
But I'm hoping that we will also have a board of selectmen at that point that will be able to work together and collaborate, that we won't be looking at just these 3-2 votes. My goal will be to figure out how can we get whoever our Republican or other counterparts may be, because there is somebody in the race who is running who is not a Republican. There's got a Libertarian candidate on the ballot who's actually an incumbent right now. How do we bring the people together to the table and try to come to some consensus? Not everything's going to be
Right.
unanimous, but I believe we need to reach for consensus and not just say, well, we've got 3 votes, we can do it, that's good enough. Because I don't believe that we live in the kind of town where one side can just dominate the other one and expect to govern effectively.
Okay. Well, in light of the past, it's a tall order, but I think you can do it, right?
I think so too.
We think you can do it. Let's look at our slideshow of the slate of the Democratic Party in Colchester for 2003. So, Bernie, I want to show you some of this, and you can introduce some of the people. That's the whole
Sure.
slate. We have
Yes.
individual photos, but there you are. Okay, let's go on. All right, there you are, and I like that because that is your pretty much your value statement, your things that we just talked about that you want to do. Let's bring Colchester together. Oh, there you are in a nice suit. And why is the tie red and not blue? It should be, well,
It's a blue suit, it's a
white,
red
blue.
tie,
Red,
and
white,
we're
blue.
bringing
Yep,
Colchester
perfect,
together.
Perfect. Okay, and there you are with your husband. Your dog's name is what?
This is Tycho, so this is
All
my
right.
husband Jack and our lovely
Now,
black
is that
lab
in front
Tycho.
of your house? In
No,
Colchester?
no, I wish.
Oh.
This is at Ruby Cohen Meadows on
Okay.
McDonald Road.
All right. Well, are you going to have an open house when you finally get your house done? I'm
Yes,
sure.
someday. Come to the
Someday.
Christmas party.
Okay, that's great. I'll keep going. And there you are again. Open to all, the library.
Yes, so this is
Talking
Cragen
about-
Memorial Library. I
Right.
love what it says on the
Right.
front. To me, that is as much the message of the campaign as anything else too.
Right.
The
we
idea
had
that
we had a show just last week with Kate Byrode and Amy D'Amica talking about the library issues.
Yeah.
Very important. Keep going. Oh, yeah. And there you are. Why don't you talk about your co-runners of the Board of Selectmen?
So these are my friends, Rosemary Coyle, Denise Turner, both of whom are current members of the Board of Selectmen. I'm really excited that both of them are running again this year. Both Rosemary and Denise have such great institutional knowledge and background that I think is really important. One of the things that I was excited about with this campaign this year is the opportunity for the Democrats to run a slate that combines people who have that background history, who are longtime public servants, advocates for the town of Colchester, with people who are maybe running for the first time, who are community leaders, but they're bringing new perspectives. And that's why I'm excited that Dave Koji is joining us.
Yeah, let's go on. You'll see the people you're talking about. So keep going. So now here they are. There's Dave and the 3 of them running for selectmen, as you talked about. Again, the 4 of you in front of the library. And there's Rosemary and Denise and Dave. You already talked about them. And now let's talk about the next. There's in front of the museum. Here we go. Gail, talk about our town clerk.
Gail Furman, town clerk. So Gail is a certified municipal town clerk. I think that that's really important. As I mentioned earlier in the show, that office touches so many different aspects of the state and federal government in some cases, that you really need somebody who has the expertise to administer that office effectively. And I really believe that Gail continues to be that person, no matter what the first selectman who currently sits there might say right now. I think that's all political, and I have faith in Gail, and I really hope that she will continue to serve and that the voters of Colchester will re-elect her in November.
Great. Let's go on. We have Michelle, the tax collector.
Michelle Wyatt, tax collector. Michelle is a certified municipal collector and has the highest collection rate in the history of Colchester.
Really?
Yeah. Why does that matter? Because when the collection rate drops, it means that the rest of us actually will need to end up paying more. If we don't hit the targets for the collection rate, then next year, we're all going to have to pay in a little bit more because the people who maybe aren't or are unable to pay. It takes a certain skill set not just to collect the bills that come in on their own, but then to make sure that the office is doing what it needs to do to hit the marks that they have promised the Board of Finance they would hit. When I served on that board, we had conversations with Michelle Wyatt in some challenging times about what was a likely collection rate. And there were moments where our board asked her, Michelle, can you push that number? Can you, make sure your office is getting closer to that 100% collection number? She would run her numbers and she would come back and say, you know what, I can get to this. She saved, all of us quite a bit of money because she was able to get her office to work more effectively than it has ever worked before.
Great.
And we need to continue that, which is again why I hope that voters will give Michelle another term as tax collector.
All right, let's go on. Let's see what else we have. There's Michelle, and there's Gail and Michelle in front of the museum, and Sean Gillespie, who's running for treasurer. He's a newcomer to the slate, right?
Yes. So Sean is a newcomer. Sean has a background largely in IT, but he does IT as it relates to banking. So he brings a new perspective that I think will be really valuable. And I hope that Sean will be given the chance by voters this fall on November 7th to become our new treasurer for the town of Colchester.
Okay. Keep going. After Sean, now we have Sean with the tax collector and the town clerk. Next. Oh, here you were mentioning Kate before, the Board of Finance.
Yep,
Karen, I'm sorry.
That's
Karen Belding at the Board of Finance, yes. And her partner, Scott Chapman. You mentioned how important they were.
Yes, yeah. So bringing in new perspectives to the Board of Finance and change, I think, is so important this year. If you're looking for change on Board of Finance, Karen Belding and Scott Chapman are your candidates this year.
Okay, great. Keep going. There they are, together with Scott Gillespie and Chris Rivers. Now we have the Board of Education. Chris is an incumbent running again. Keep going. And Michelle is an incumbent running now. And our newcomer, Stephanie Tracy Kalash, Board of Education. What about those three?
So Chris has been such an important leader on the Board of Education, and along with Michelle Millington. What I love about that board right now is that is one place where I think Colchester's town government is still living up to that ideal that we can all work together, that Democrats and Republicans might have some different philosophies, but when we get on our boards, we can put some of that aside and work together for the good of the town. They might not agree on everything, but that board has been able to develop consensus and has gotten a bad rap for it in some cases from some of the Republicans in town who maybe didn't want them to take a stand on certain issues that they did. But I think that Chris and Michelle have both been part of that process of bringing people together. So I'm really proud of them for that. I'm honored to serve on this ticket alongside candidates like the two of them. And I'm really glad to have Stephanie, who has her own background when it comes to childhood in Colchester. She is part of Castle, and she has a perspective when it comes to our young families in town that I think is really valuable. So I want to make sure that Stephanie is joining them on November 7th when we vote.
Great. All right, and we're toward the end of the slate. Keep going. Oh, there you are with the Board of Education candidates, and now we have, again, in front of Bacon Academy.
Old Bacon Academy.
Board of Education, that makes sense. And now Andrew Canoia and Chris Descartes, Board of Assessment Appeals. The people have complaints about their assessments, they can go to the board and see if they can change the valuation of their properties, right?
Exactly.
That's what goes
and
on
Andrew,
there.
having served for a long time on that board, he's bringing that institutional knowledge that's so important in a position like that. Krista is a newcomer, but she's been involved in our community. Krista is very level-headed, and I think that that's also something that you really need on the Board of Assessment Appeals, and I'm hoping that both of them will be elected.
And I think now the last photograph of this Krista, and I think there's Andrew, and then the last photograph I think is again with your Bernie sign and with our Democratic Town Committee Chair Monica Egan in the mix there. Okay, all right, great. So I think you did a good job talking about your slate. And now I just want to ask you, of all the jobs that you're going to have to do, is there anything that we left out that you want to talk about that you need to do as first selectman? Anything?
I think we covered
covered everything.
quite a
Good.
bit of it.
All right. Then the last thing I want you to do is just tell the voters again, if you're just talking to the voters, why they need to elect Bernie Dennler first selectman.
Right. So I'm running for first selectman of Colchester because I believe that we need to restore professionalism in our town government and to bring civility and stability back to our town hall. The embarrassing headlines that we've seen in local media, whether it's in the River East or even statewide or in some cases national media, have not painted our town in a positive light. And the fact is that those issues were unforced errors. We didn't need to have those things happen in Colchester. And if your first selectman was focused on doing the day-to-day operations of the town, managing our town government effectively, I don't believe we would have seen those headlines. I'm not asking for voters to hire me or to vote for me to be a political figurehead. I'm asking for them to hire me to do a job. That job is to be the leader of the town of Colchester, the so-called chief executive officer of the town of Colchester. I believe Colchester deserves a first selectman who will act more like a town manager. We might not have a town manager position, but that is what your first selectman should aspire to. It's not just about making headlines and making drama. There is a lot of administrative work that needs to get done. And I have the background and the professional experience to do that job for you so that you don't have to see some of the things in the paper that you've seen over the last couple of years. I will get Colchester's town government working the way that it is supposed to, and I will also fight for you and advocate for you. That's what I do in my day job. When residents come into my office, I don't know if they're Democrats or Republicans. When you got a pothole, my job is to try to make sure that it gets fixed, that Public Works gets out there and does what it's supposed to do. When there's other issues in town, my job is to help you find out how your government can come to your aid and get things done. And sometimes to tell you what it's not able to do so that you can figure out what needs to happen. I will always fight for residents. I'll fight for the residents of Colchester. I've enjoyed serving another town, but I'm really excited to be able to do that for my own community now.
Okay, great. I think you got the last word, and you've said it, all right? Thank you. We'll see you all next time on Talk Back. And don't forget, November 7th.
November 7th.
Please vote. Please vote. Register and vote. Bye.